So hi everybody, it's Hailey here with the Woolfer, and I am so pleased to welcome Lisa Tucker. She is a former Woolfer, a longtime Woolfer, and an extraordinary writer and an extraordinary professor of law at Drexel University. She specializes in among other things, Supreme Court, constitutional law issues. She is also in her spare time. I feel like we all have these like multiple hats. She has also been a writer of children's books primarily, though I did see that you wrote one prior novel as well.
I did.
So she is a writer in her spare time, and in her spare time, she took the last few years to write this extraordinary book, Hamilton and the Law. I'm going to show my copy. She has a copy as well, but it's like, you can tell I'm a lawyer because I tabbed it as I was reading through it. That is such a fun collection of essays, basically taking the musical of Hamilton, which we all is so beloved, is probably the most loved musical, I want to say, of the last, like, clearly of the 2000s, right?
Absolutely.
And has taken that and used it as a springboard for a discussion of all of these really interesting legal issues, and has pulled in a wonderful compendium of writers, specialists, everything from constitutional law specialists, First Amendment, labor law, banking law, a former solicitor general, a woman who runs
two former solicitors general.
A woman who runs a domestic violence clinic in Wisconsin, to write all about how Hamilton sort of touches upon their particular topic of interest. And I have to say, it was really enjoyable. I didn't read it in one sitting, but I read it in two sittings because it was that enjoyable. And so welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much. That was so.
We're also wearing the same things.
We are, and we didn't even call each other first.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, we're connected.
We're connected, absolutely. Yeah. So first of all, just if you could talk a little bit about how you came to this. I mean, obviously, you're a law professor, and so the idea of writing a book about law is not surprising. Yeah. Many law professors do, but this is something completely different. Yeah. So tell us how you got into how this came about.
Well, one of the things I love about Woolfer is that, we're all over 40, I guess. I'm about to turn 53. And one of the things I've been finding in my life as I get older is how many different parts of my life have just started to sort of come together in weird ways. It's like, as you said, we all wear a lot of hats. And it's been so fun to see sort of that intersection of different parts of my life. So undergrad, I was a drama major. I thought that, I was going to do something in theater. I really believe that law is theater, to be honest with you. So much of what we do is performance in one way or another. And it's so creative what we do, which is what I love about teaching law. And then I saw Hamilton for the first time. It holds a very special place in my heart because the person I'm now married to for almost 3 years took me on a surprise date to see it in New York in December of 16. So, this wonderful evening that really got me thinking about it even more than maybe I would have otherwise. But when this really came to be was my daughter, who's now a sophomore in college, and she was a junior in high school, and we were doing that trip that probably a million Woolfers have done, where you're going to see every college possible in the 10 days your kid has for spring break. So we're in the car, and she loves musical theater too, and we're listening to Hamilton probably over and over again, pretty much. And all of a sudden I looked at her and I said, we know from the first 10 minutes of the show, and probably also from, US history in 10th grade, that Burr is going to kill Hamilton at the end, that there's going to be this duel. So why do we tell this whole backstory? Why is it so fascinating to us to see this relationship between these two men develop over about 30 years in American history? And I really think the reason why is because we need to decide what the motivations of these two guys are. Does Burr intend to kill Hamilton? Is he basically, if you look at the libretto, he is talking about killing Hamilton from,
the very beginning.
When they are both 20 years old. Or is Hamilton acting in self-defense, or is Burr acting in self-defense rather, thinking that Hamilton is going to shoot him? Or is this maybe suicide by duel? We know that by this point in his life, Hamilton is very, very depressed. He feels like he's disgraced his family. Is this a way for him to exit, perhaps with a little bit of honor? And when you go back and you trace that through the musical, it's amazing all the Easter eggs you find and all the clues you find through the musical. So I asked my daughter to start writing them down. And we ended up doing at Drexel a little trial, a trial where we tried Aaron Burr for the murder of Alexander Hamilton using only the script as evidence. Not only the script, we also looked at the musical and the staging and stuff and saw like what they were doing physically.
Of course.
And entered this all, yes,
the narrative of the musical.
Nothing out of Ron Chernow's book, nothing out of real American history, just the musical as evidence. And we had the best time. So when I started talking to other lawyers and law professors about it, what I found was that you and I are not the only lawyers and law professors who are obsessed with this. And also other people just like Woolfers who are smart and educated, maybe not legally trained, but just, they're interested in new ideas, said Hamilton is just, I'm obsessed. And so I thought, what if we had a bunch of lawyers talk about what they see in Hamilton, but we don't do it in a way that only appeals to lawyers. Mm-hmm. So what I asked my contributors to do was write about a short article that might appear in the Atlantic or the New Yorker, something that any mainstream reader who, likes to read quality stuff would enjoy. And, you said you read it in 2 sittings, and I'm so honored actually. Each piece is only about 2,500 words. That's about 10 pages.
Absolutely.
Read it like while the spaghetti sauce is boiling on the stove. And that was our intent.
Or at night, or you're sitting in bed and you just read one little one.
Totally. And you can also skip over stuff that doesn't interest you. Like if banking is not your thing, you don't have to read that.
So what's so interesting to me is it first of all, I did do a little Googling of you and I saw that you actually, this is not your first foray into trying to make something that is otherwise is more sort of academically legal, digestible. You wrote a SCOTUSblog that was intended to be digestible to the more average lay person. So yes. You've got this little sort of sneaky thread in here trying to make these things more interesting and accessible to the average reader. But what I found so interesting about this sort of thematically in a meta way is that I do feel that part of what Lin-Manuel Miranda's intention was to take something that is, part of obviously not only our history, but very much our founding myth.
Yes.
And to not only make it accessible and interesting, and he did that in a lot of different ways. He made it accessible by changing a traditional musical. He even made musicals accessible, right? The whole idea of accessibility was kind of blown. It's like, phew.
Right. There are no jazz hands in him.
No, not only the subject matter, but taking it and making it a rap, a rap musical.
Hip hop. Yep.
Hip hop. And more kids all of a sudden are like, we're going to go down. I had all these friends who had children in New York City who are all of a sudden making pilgrimages down to Hamilton's grave, which is in Lower Manhattan, actually right near where I work. Yep. But it enlivened some of our founding myths and our founding origination back into the public consciousness. And one thing that a lot of your writers write about is how interesting. What an interesting project this is and how it actually could potentially change how our polity reacts to some of these founding myths and thinks about some of these founding myths, as well as how that may change in a more sort of nuanced way how judges and lawyers and others sort of look to theories of interpretation of law, originalism. Yeah. But not to get too like wonky on that stuff, which I find fascinating. We can talk about it some other time, but to talk about the founding myth, because I feel like we're in this key moment in our lives, in our polity, where we're really grappling with our founding myth. Like the last 4 years has been this grappling of the founding myth.
What is America supposed to be? And who is America? Right? Is America a sum of its parts? Is it something greater than that? Yeah. I mean, so Lin-Manuel Miranda has said many times, and this is one of my favorite lines that he has, is that Hamilton the musical is the story of America then told by America now. And I love that idea because if we take the story of America then and we understand that history is always told from a perspective, we understand that the perspective, the lens through which we've seen history has mostly been the white male property owner perspective. What Lynn does is he says, that's not America now. America now is diverse. America now is racially diverse. It's ideologically diverse. We have, we're making strides towards gender equity, and, we hope we are anyway, right? And so he asks us to look at the very same story as if these people were simultaneously in America then and America now. So we see that with everything from, John Lawrence being very, very vocal about slavery and racial equality to just the visual on the stage of, if you think about it, the people of color are the good guys and the only white actors are the bad guys.
Yes.
Seabury is white and King George is white, and they're the bad guys, right? And Angelica Schuyler saying, I'm going to compel him to put women in the sequel, right? To make these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. When I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'm going to compel him to put women
in the sequel. And there's a wonderful essay that uses that as a launching pad.
Exactly.
For the introduction of women, or the way that we can introduce women into this narrative story, and how the law actually these things, I have a tendency sometimes to forget that women couldn't contract, that women couldn't, really, when you look at these very powerful women who came from very powerful families with a lot of money, and how they needed actually to have these marriages. They needed to have these men to kind of navigate their worlds.
And I know that so many Woolfers were watching Bridgerton right now.
Yes, exactly.
That's that story, right?
That's exactly the same story.
If we think of Angelica Schuyler saying, I'm going to compel him to include women in the sequel, if we think of this musical as being the sequel, this is the sequel, and all of a sudden we're including women and we're hearing what they have to say. And instead of just talking about founding fathers, we're talking about founding mothers too. And we're making them important people in the narrative, right? They talk about the narrative all the way through. Let me be part of this narrative. And that's what Lynn is trying to do in the musical. And one of the things I love about it is that I see it as being so Shakespearean, because we bring our own experiences to Hamilton. And so as women, as feminists, we really relate to that character. And we really relate to Eliza, who, she gets married and she plays the typical life role, but look what she does. She puts her husband in history, and she really, she writes to General Washington. What woman does that, right? So I love this feeling of Hamilton being the sequel and part of that founding myth, but the sequel to the myth. Here's another way of looking at it. And I haven't read the Bridgerton books, but from what I'm told, each book focuses on a different character. So I think that, we can look at Hamilton that way too.
To frame it in the character's vision.
Yes.
Right, and to tell that individual story.
Yes.
It is, kind of another point at which I personally felt, as you say, you bring your own experiences to this type of a wonderful, that's true art, when you can actually see yourself reflected in what is on stage. As I shared with you on email, I participated in a lot of the legal assistance programs against the president's Muslim ban. And so I was at the airports, and I was helping clients at the airports get in, and I was at the courts. And this one of my favorite sort of cheers from Hamilton, which is immigrants, we get the job done, became an anthem.
It did.
It really became an anthem. And that was to
the point where the audience cheers whenever that line is said.
Exactly.
They actually had to add extra bars into there so that there's time to let the audience die down.
And I actually saw it a few different times. And what was interesting is that it got a bigger cheer the further we moved into the Trump administration.
So
you had this kind of interesting reaction to the play that was very much being informed by what people were experiencing in real time in their lives. But so what I found so fascinating about, and this is something that is brought out in a few different places in this book by a few different writers, is, obviously Hamilton was an immigrant in the same sense that he actually came from a different country, but he wasn't an immigrant the way that we think of immigrants today. He was someone who was traveling from one English outpost to another English outpost. He still was basically of Scotch descent. But Lynn sort of was able to still take this quality and transform it and give it different meaning, and then have that also resonate with the idea of the founding myth of immigrants, that we aren't all white people. Have it just kind of flavor how we view him, and how we view him as as a scrapping, hardworking, hitting the soil, moving forward, taking advantage of what this country has to offer, and trying to really counter a different view of immigrants that we are, that we've been sort of fed in the last 4 years. I found that a really interesting thing.
And that's been forced on us.
And it's been forced on us.
Yeah, well, yeah. And Burr really plays that role throughout the musical. If you think of how the musical starts, it's with Burr insulting Hamilton. How did this orphan immigrant kid, and he does it all through the musical. He calls him all kinds of names, right? And I guess one question I have is, are we supposed to be examining that ideology, that philosophy, that outlook, and really thinking about it? Because the other thing I don't think is clear in this musical is who the hero is supposed to be. Is Hamilton supposed to be a hero? Is Burr supposed to be a hero? Are they both tragically flawed? Again, getting back to Shakespeare. And I loved the thing you said a minute ago, Cara, about the best art we can see ourselves in, because I also think the best art is the best teacher. The best art makes us think. The best art allows us to see something different every time we look at it. In the time that I worked on this book, I keep finding new things in this musical. And one of the things that's so fascinating to me about it is that any perspective, I don't care what your politics are, I don't care what your background is, you can see something here that you can relate to. And there's something genius about, Lin-Manuel Miranda won a MacArthur grant, the Genius Grant, right? I don't think anybody would argue with the fact that he's a genius, but he's a genius writing about this genius who is doing these amazing things. And again, the founding myth, founding of America. And then you see that Lynn is recreating that story as if we're getting a different perspective on the founding. And so, he tweeted out once, and I guess it's become obvious that I'm a fan, but many of us may have kids who are in high school or college. And I remember vividly that when my daughter was taking AP US history, which they call APUSH, he tweeted out the night before the exam and he said, "APUSH kids, I've done all I can do. Now it's up to you." And I do love that.
That's so cute.
My kids' generation loved that class in a way I certainly didn't.
Because it felt alive for them in a way that it didn't feel for us.
Yes.
And the other thing is, I was thinking about it this morning, how COVID has, it's sort of interesting to have a book come out about musicals at a time when nobody can see musicals.
When no one can see it.
And that's it's really hit, COVID has hit, perhaps of all industries, it's the art industry, the theater community, the music community have been so desperately hit by the inability to perform and to have audiences. But Lynn did actually navigate this onto a streaming service. And it was one of the, I actually didn't get a chance to look up the numbers, but I recall it being watched by, a massive amount of people. So I do think that this is a piece that will continue to generate on. And once we get out of COVID, it will, there will be touring companies and there will be further discussions, and this will continue to live a life, a very vibrant life for a very, very long period of time. But I thought
that's so important about Disney Plus is that we know, and one thing that Lynn and his wife, Vanessa Nadal, who is an attorney, actually, she was stay for many years in New York. One thing they did was help reform in the state legislature in New York the scalping laws, because they didn't want it to just be available to rich people. And we know how expensive the tickets got. So by getting it onto Disney Plus, where it was like $11 to subscribe for a month, so many more people had access.
That's true.
In this story.
To take in the story. And I know that they, before the theaters closed down, they had a very robust program where they were getting kids in from New York public schools to see the show as well. So they're incredible in terms of how they really we're trying to expand in so many different ways access to this particular piece of theater. And also, one topic that is also discussed in this book by one of your contributors is how they really transformed casting. And how interesting that was. And that's another theme that is, in the industry, it's something that's talked about a lot. I mean, the last Academy Awards or the one before that, I'm forgetting COVID is, but where we had a number of women, prominent women who spoke up about, including Frances McDormand, about getting women in the door. Obviously not just with casting, but also with larger production roles and directorial roles and cinematography roles. But here in particular,
and I think one before that was when there was a lot of commentary about the whitewashing of the Oscars, how all the
exactly
were nominated or won Oscars. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And here you had someone who was really actively pushing to try to transform how what ended up being the biggest Broadway hit, with a casting process, and how that has lots of interesting legal, that in of itself has all kinds of interesting legal ramifications.
So the author, Marcia McCormick, is an employment law expert. And no matter how much, I think Marcia really comes to it from a place that I know I share, which is, this is great if we can have colorblind casting, if we can find more opportunities for an incredibly talented and rich community that hasn't typically had the opportunity. And yet we've got employment laws in this country that say you can't discriminate on the basis of race. And so when this casting call went out specifically for non-white performers, there was some backlash and there was some question about whether they could legally do that, even within the actors union.
Yeah.
And so even, I think one thing we see so often in the law, Cara, and something I teach my students is that law and justice don't always intersect. And we think of law as being a route to justice, but sometimes law takes us in a direction that we go, well, wait a minute, that can't possibly be right. As we know, they have been successful in continuing that with every cast and with every replacement. But there was some legal finagling to do, just as there was with lots of other aspects of the musical that we think about. For example, so much of what's in there is borrowed pretty liberally from hip hop artists, from the names of the songs to lyrics to, it's basically just wholesale taken and put into this musical. According to copyright law, you can't really do that without permission. And so where is the line? When can you do it? Can you do it as an homage? Can you do it? How can you do it? And, this is exactly what we're talking about coming to it through our own lens. My friends who are interested in copyright issues looked at this and immediately said, oh my gosh, how can they do this? Like, they're thinking that in, Act One. It's a form of fan fiction in some ways. So the legal issues that come up are both, I think, more global, like you were talking about the founding myth, but also very, very specific.
Very specific. And
casting call.
Yeah. And it's interesting we talk about the sort of homage to rap. I mean, you also have the complication of that being a particular genre of music where there has been so much exploitation.
Yes.
And so there's also, I would say, a lot more sensitivity by the people who are actually doing this Hamilton to begin with, about not exploiting a certain sort of certain group or a certain genre. People who make music in a certain genre. And so there's that additional sort of ethical, if you will, complication
Absolutely.
as well.
Sure. That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And sort of to continue with the rap theme really quickly, but the other I love, there is a piece in here about dueling. And
Yes.
obviously that's the punchline for anyone who doesn't know what happens at the end of Hamilton. There is a duel.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. There is a duel. Somebody gets killed. It's Alexander Hamilton. But the idea of dueling is really reflected, mirrored through the actual production as well, because rap is obviously a musical genre which is about dueling. It's about going back and forth and seeing who can freestyle better. And so
and what's that movie with, I think it's with Vanilla Ice maybe, where they actually have the competition in the movie?
No, not Vanilla Ice. No, Eminem.
Oh, okay. See, I don't know anything about rap.
The real white rapper.
Forgive me. Okay. Forgive me. See, I don't even know. That's how bad I am. I know nothing about rap.
Yeah. No, but
you don't have to know rap to love Hamilton.
You don't have to love. Yeah. In fact, some people didn't love rap before Hamilton.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
But yeah, that was 8 Mile, and that's Eminem. But yes, it's that whole dueling, and you see that actually performatively in the production.
Yep.
And there's a really interesting article about dueling, kind of riffing off of that in your piece.
Yes. So Hamilton is all a duel, all of it. It's this tension between Hamilton and Burr where they fight with each other. It's a tension between the political parties. It's a tension between the actual duels. And then you hear them, the cabinet battles in the show are literal rap battles. That's what they are. And there were actually more of them that got cut, but we see the form, that's a light shown on the form in those cabinet battles where we're very literally being asked to watch a rap battle. But then we see the concept of the duel go all the way through. And one thing that I think was also interesting in the show was this idea of the reason that Burr and Hamilton get into the duel in the end, ostensibly anyway, is that Hamilton has written things about Burr that Burr finds to be, very offensive and untrue, and published those. And one of the reasons we don't have duels anymore is because we have defamation law. We can actually sue people instead of killing them. And it's a direct derivative. That's why we have defamation law.
It's so fascinating.
Duels. Yeah. One other thing about duels that I just want to throw in there, the legal part. In the end, when Philip is going over to New Jersey to duel, and he says, "I'm going over there. Everything is legal in New Jersey."
Yes,
that together in unison. Actually, not true. I pulled the dueling laws from the late 1700s, early 1800s in both New Jersey and New York, and dueling was absolutely illegal. So there's a little departure.
I felt like that was a little like almost Sopranos-like throw in.
Totally. But I have people argue with me about this. I'm like, nope, it was totally illegal.
Illegal. A little creative license there.
Exactly. And Burr was actually indicted for the murder of Hamilton, both in New Jersey and New York. He was never tried.
Yeah. So has this group, now I was reading, you got a wonderful, I should say to everybody, you got a wonderful, wonderful write-up in the Washington Post, which everyone should take a look at, which speaks to how really well written and well put together this book is. But I was wondering, all of these wonderful authors, are they now, do you guys all have a Slack channel or a WhatsApp? I feel like this could be discussions that are ongoing, because I know that each of them really loved the musical and really enjoyed writing what they wrote.
Yeah. No, we don't, but we are going to have starting, a lot of us are coming back together starting on January 27th. We're teaching a 4-class session at the 92nd Street Y. And when I say at the 92nd Street Y, I mean, over
virtually
92nd Street Y. We're going to have 4 classes, one on the Constitution, one on art and law, one on immigration, and then one on diversity, race, gender, and so forth, and how they're reflected in the musical. So people can start signing up for that as of today if they're interested. And it won't just be me, it's going to be a whole bunch of the contributors coming together to talk.
That's so cool. So if anybody is watching this and you have a particular interest in that, I do feel like this is a time, a moment where we have not had just newfound interest in politics, in the political
Yes.
system, in
Yes.
the duel. Like I feel like we're witnessing
Yes.
a little bit of a duel. There's going to be a duel on the 6th, right? We are definitely at a point where we have more people now who know about the intricacies of certifying an election than I think ever in our history we have known. You know, this is a great series for you to sign up for. Also, the book is really enjoyable, and it does touch on so many of these topics, and it's in these wonderful little digestible, as Lisa was saying, little digestible nuggets, so you can kind of pick and choose as you go along. It's you can find it at, there's a website, Hamilton and the Book.
Hamilton and the Law Book.
And the Law Book, sorry, .com. So there's a website for that. That's the book again.
Oh, thank you.
And it was just really, I have to say, it's such a pleasure seeing you, meeting you again.
You too.
Virtually. And is there gonna be another one? Are we gonna wait to see another musical?
People keep asking me that. I don't know, we'll see. But I mean, I just want to say as we close that this Woolfer community is so amazing, and it's made so many connections, people that I knew just a tiny bit or didn't know at all. And now I feel like you and I are friends, Cara. And I just want to compliment Nina and the whole Woolfer team for this community that they've built. I think it's been really, really helpful during COVID as well.
It has been a lifesaver for so many of us. And when I was speaking to Nina about interviewing you, she did want me to tell you that not only to say hello, but that your sweet post about your wedding, like I think it's three years ago or so.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
It's just still one of her favorites. So.
Oh, that's so nice. And when you say that about certifying elections, my groom, my Prince Charming, his field is election law. So when you were watching the map, we used to call it the map show around here.
Yes.
When we were watching C-SPAN or MSNBC, and they were saying, and here's Philadelphia, and here's where this was happening. That was him. You were watching him. So I'm actually so sick of the certifying of the election. To die. Like, let it be over.
You're gonna go back to listening to musicals.
I want to listen to musicals again. So January 6th, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
This has been so much
fun. Thank you again so much, and looking forward to continuing to talk to you about this.
Yay. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.